Good evening, everyone. We see there are some attendees already. If you could in the chat show us where you're from, that will be something that is interesting.
Yeah, that would be great. We have 1 more minute to start, and then we can know where guests are from.
I myself am from Brazil.
Hi, Clarissa. Hi, Namita. I myself, I'm in England. I'm from Brazil as well, but I live in England, in Southwest in England. Oh, from India, nice. New Jersey.
India.
Yeah. I see my mom is connected. Hi, Mom. Argentina. Hello.
Tatiana.
Well, since it is time, we will start this activity. And I would like to bid you good night, good afternoon, no matter where you're from. My name is Hector Moraes, and I have been studying logosophy for the last 14 years. And logosophy is a new science focused on the conscious evolution of the human being and all that entails. It was created by Argentine humanist Carlos Bernardo González Pecotti in 1930s, which makes this the year on which logosophy completes 91 years. And although it started in Argentina, today it has many cultural centers throughout the world, where students gather to deepen their understanding of the study and participate in many activities. The Logosophical Foundation is a non-profit organization focused on education, and it possesses a unique pedagogy linked to it. And in Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, there are logosophical schools where many generations of students have benefited from this teaching method. Logosophy is also a very practical science where the main field of experimentation is life itself. Today, we show here Mariana and Simon, who are both logosophy students living in the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Hector. So yes, as Hector said, my name is Mariana. I have been studying for logosophy for a little while now. I first got in contact with logosophy when I was in Brazil. Then I moved to US, where I lived there for almost 8 years. And I have recently moved to UK. So that I think I explain a little bit my accent. And Simon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Simon, and I've started studying logosophy a little bit more recently than Mariana. I've lived in the UK for all my life, both in London and now in Sheffield in the north of England. I've been involved in video and media production for many years. Yeah, and that's me.
Thank you, Simon. Tonight, we both will share a little bit about how logosophy help us to live our life more consciously. And I would like to start by asking, are we conscious of what we think, do, or fail to do during the day? for me, it was only with logosophy that I could truly see that I wasn't. I miss out many, many moments of my life in a sense that I was there, of course, but I was not consciously there, you know, doing things without really noticing what I was doing. There is a sentence of logosophy that has helped me become aware of this reality. It has helped me to see it clearly. Because, yeah, I could see that I got distracted, like just now, but I never thought about the harm it could cause on me. So this is the teaching that helped me. In general, man is not conscious of what he thinks, does, or fails to do during the most of the day. In other words, he's not aware of what is happening in his inner self. He becomes distracted very easily or unnecessarily seeks motives for distraction. So I will start by telling when I first came in contact with logosophy and how it helped me to identify moments of distraction, and then how progressively I changed this reality within me. I went to a logosophical talk, open talk, just like this one, and the talk was about all kinds of thoughts that we can have in our mind and how, in the way of control them. At the end, an exercise was proposed and it got stuck in my mind. It was to go home and try to think about only one thought. At the time, I was planning a trip, my first trip all by myself, and I was very motivated about it, and I was but at the same time I was very insecure to travel alone in South America. So I want to plan everything in detail, and there was a lot of things to think about regarding this trip. On my journey back home from that talk, I started thinking about the trip and thinking, but suddenly I caught myself in another thought, a thought very unrelated to the travel plans. Astonished and recalling the proposal exercise, I tried to fall back my thoughts to see where have I deviated. I followed my thoughts until the last one related to the trip. And surprisingly, I was very far from the thoughts that I want to think. A lot of other thoughts not related to the trip had come and gone in my mind before I even realized that I was not thinking about the trip anymore. So I didn't want to think about those thoughts. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to even though it happens, I didn't want them, but it happens. So I got scared about the lack of control I have over my thoughts. And then I asked myself, is it normal to have these kind of movements of thoughts? Is it really possible to control what I think and when I want to think? So I'd like to suggest you to try this exercise later on. Choose one thing to think about and see if you can stay on it. Observe yourself. See if the other non-related thoughts show up in your mind and if you can control them or not. Now we will hear Simon's experience for a bit.
Thanks, Mariana. Yeah, before starting to study logosophy, I had tried various, we could call them self-development methods. I had tried things such as meditation, where we try to become aware of what our minds are doing or to deal with negative thoughts or behaviors, basically to try to improve myself in some way. And I'm not denying that there's any value to those things, because there were, But I couldn't help noticing that it was only with logosophy that I began to actually experience thoughts as an actual tangible, practical reality that I could begin to work with. And what do I mean by this exactly? I'll start with an example that may help make things clearer. It had been a habit with me, as with many people, I think, these days, to fall into looking at social media. And for me, due to my line of work in video, online videos were the one that caused the problem. So I would log into the internet with some intention of looking just briefly for something, or just to quickly see what new videos there were. But then in some situations, this could easily turn into far too much time. And I didn't accomplish tasks that I'd meant to do. And I regretted wasting time afterwards. And sometimes I would even do this instead of spending time with my family. And I'm sure you've experienced something at least similar. This is a behavior that you repeat, even though you know and are aware afterwards that it's not helpful. And yet the behavior repeats. And perhaps like me, you've even tried some self-help techniques or habit changing. This is popular at the moment. Personally, I also tried some apps which restrict your access to the internet or block some of those more manipulative habit-forming techniques that are used by technology companies. And some of this was helpful to an extent. But it was with logosophy that I finally overcame this habit a bit more permanently. And this was possible really because I began to actually discover the reality of what we could call my internal world and the mental movements that were occurring there. Now, I don't mean that I now have developed complete control of every thought in my mind or anything like that, just that I've found some actual real improvement. And I found that even some improvement of this kind can make a real difference. But what is an internal world then? I mean, is that just a kind of nice idea that people talk about that's thrown out? Or is that something actually real? I mean, have you ever thought about whether you have something called an internal world? Now, already I've realized that it can actually be quite a difficult thing to express this to someone who's unfamiliar with logosophy. So perhaps an analogy will better explain something to you about thoughts. So if you hear a song on the radio and later find yourself humming it, the question is, did you deliberately decide to think about that song? Or did it seem to just simply sort of pop into your head unannounced? And if you pay attention, often you'll find that the thought about the song does seem to just come and go according to its own whim. Sometimes even to the point that you no longer want to think about that song. You don't even like it in some cases, and yet it keeps coming into your mind. So why is that? Have you ever thought about how strange that really is? A memory of a song that seems to behave according to its own whims, as if it literally has a life of its own. So what is really happening here? And logosophy presents an interesting concept about the thoughts. And it says, there intervene thoughts which have a life of their own. In other words, thoughts which move and carry out their activities independently of the participation of the mind that lodges them. And while you think about that, I'll just pass back to Mariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, this concept of thought also was very important for me, because it helped me to understand the reasons that I couldn't sustain one thought for a long time in my mind. My thoughts acquire a life of their own and act independently of my will. So in logosophy, I learned that it was possible to control my thoughts. It was not easy, but it was possible. I learned that I could start by getting to know them, identify the thoughts, and select them. So I start to make an examination of my thoughts, taking notes of the ones that had a great influence within me, the ones that were more frequently in my mind. And it was then that I admit that I had this tendency of daydream. I observed my mind wandering on many occasions during the day. So I caught myself imagining living another life or being in another place, imagine very unrealistic situations, think without purpose or things not activable or useful. And even though it was very common and happened many times during my day, I could only identify it and admit it after studying logosophy. And even though I had identified the daydream, all those daydream thoughts in my mind, I still need to stop it and to replace it. And it was not easy to do it. So after studying logosophy and applying it to my own life, I start to get better, to view my own self in another way. What was really going on inside of me, to look this inner self, my inner world. So it was then that I come up with a plan. The tool that I use, I believe is very common and everybody uses it. But it helped me a lot to control my thought. It was a to-do list. So, but instead of organizing the activities of my day, which I do use for this too, I use it to organize my thoughts. So I list the thoughts that I want to think. So it became my to think list. But what I did was I plan ahead what I want to think, to be ready to select a good thought whenever I need it, especially in those moments where I have identified my mind wandering the most. So I practice of creating this to-do list, and it helped me get back on track whenever I get distracted. So to have this list on handy, I could recognize easily that I was getting distracted and I was getting back to the thought that I really wanted to think. But I must admit that it was a big effort to create and to use the list. And of course, I didn't manage to do this overnight. It was a process, and it was here with logosophy that I could better analyze my days, comparing myself when I used the list, when I didn't use the list. Look inside of me and noticing the differences in my mood, in my motivation, in my performance. So over time, I observed that I was gaining more control of my thoughts. I was more in charge of what I wanted to think. I noticed that with this tool, I could organize my mind to an extent that I start to observe, to really see things that I wasn't able to see before. And I'm not saying externally, I'm saying internally. Pay attention to things that was happening inside of me. It was as if a whole new world had opened up in front of my eyes. I was in front of this new reality, a reality of seeing my inner world, and a reality that I wasn't aware of it before. And you, do you know that you have an inner world? Are you aware of this reality? How often do you think about it? So now let's continue here a little bit from Simon.
Thanks, Mariana. Yeah, another image that I found helpful to understand this concept about the thoughts is one of a bus or a mental vehicle where different thoughts get on and off wherever they please. And to be clear, it's with my other examples, it's not that there's a problem with watching some videos online or having a few stray thoughts about a song or something else. I mean, there can definitely be interesting and entertaining videos that are worth watching. I mean, hopefully you're watching one now. But the question for me with this online video distraction was, did I make a conscious decision about watching those videos? Or did these thoughts just get onto that mental bus whenever they decided to? And if you reflect on any time that you may have fallen prey to kind of distraction in whatever way it may be, you would probably find something similar, that this is a period of life that you didn't live consciously or didn't deliberately decide to live in that way. And for me, these kind of observations led me to ask some other questions, such as, how many moments do I actually live this way? I mean, in general, how much of my life is actually made up of simply following thoughts that enter into my mind, thoughts that I didn't necessarily choose, or in some cases even want, thoughts that move in, one direction for a while before moving in another. And logosophy presents another concept about this, which may at first seem a bit alarming. And it says the following. If we could just have the slide up, Hector, thanks. The hours in which the mind wanders aimlessly without occupying itself in anything or in doing unimportant things is sterile time, a time spent without living, a time that passes without leaving in the conscience any memory of what was lived during these hours, which extend in most people to days, months, and years. And when I honestly reflected on this, I couldn't deny that there can be many stretches of time where life is lived this way. In fact, as I explored this more, I began to discover something else, that the movements and actions of these thoughts had created kind of half-formed concepts about many things, from my opinions on anything from politics to the weather, to big questions such as what is a human being really, and why are we here? And it was kind of like beginning to be aware of a piece of land with many uncultivated spaces, some with weeds growing sort of chaotically in a mess, others with bare patches of earth where nothing had really been done, or things that had been planted half-heartedly only to be abandoned later. And as I said, I'm certainly not going to tell you now that my mind is now a perfectly cultivated, immaculate garden. In fact, I still lose the fight to distracting thoughts. It still happens. But as I continue to study, I actually do get better at observing the action of these thoughts in my daily life, and both the amount and the severity of the distractions decreases. So how exactly do you do this and gain more conscious control over your thoughts? So returning to the example of this distraction from online videos, because it was one of the first ones where I began to notice how this was working, I noticed that a thought to check those videos was occurring in my mind. I began to be aware of it happening. For instance, if some work I was doing reached a more difficult or less interesting part, I mean, I'm sure you've had something at least somewhat similar, but perhaps the thought triggered was to get food from the fridge or make a phone call to a friend or whatever it is. And after a while, I did learn to specifically identify this thought as what we call curiosity. And I began to also notice a thought of impulsiveness that was kind of there as well. In logosophy, there are many teachings for learning how to identify thoughts. And curiosity here is a term that has a bit more specific use in logosophy than the common one. And it refers here to the idle desire to see what happens next. It's the kind of curiosity thought that might prompt you to check the latest gossip on Facebook or to buy some new product that promises new and interesting things. And to an extent, this process of becoming aware of my internal world as something real rather than vague, that can be enough for some changes to happen. And I began to get more used to noticing when a thought was acting and how that felt within my internal world. And it's by noticing that a thought is trying to get onto that mental bus that I was then able to use my what we call faculty of thinking to reflect on what thoughts I actually wanted to think. And this is not theoretical, this is a practical skill. As Mariana suggested, it requires actually deliberately or consciously thinking about what thoughts we want to have close to hand, which ones we want to have available. And I mean, there is much more to say about how you can actually create and change thoughts. It's probably a lifetime study, and I'm obviously still very much learning. But there is ultimately no substitute or trick that can replace developing this ability to observe these kind of internal movements. There is no substitute for developing the ability to pay attention to what is happening in one's internal world as something that is very real. And there is no substitute for making that effort to thinking in advance what you want to think, which is difficult at first, but it becomes easier. And there's one teaching which really helped me grasp the truth about all this, which is something you can begin to verify starting now for yourself, but it has some implications for our life. It says, thoughts, in spite of their immateriality, are as visible and tangible as if they were endowed with a corporeal quality. For if a living creature or an inanimate object which have a physical existence are visible to our eyes and can be touched by our physical hands, thoughts can be seen by the eyes of our intelligence and touched by the hands of our understanding. And I continue to be more aware of this reality in seemingly small ways, but they begin to add up. You could say I begin to tend that garden, tidy it up, and plant seeds a bit more deliberately. And I'd like to just relate one other small example that I hope shows how these very practical everyday issues do connect to big topics like the purpose of our life. And it was as part of my work, I had to record expenses in a way that I wasn't familiar with at first. And this did actually cause quite a lot of stress as I struggled to record them properly. And I would find myself surrounded by disorder, both physically and in my mind, pieces of paper in various places. And I might have uttered a phrase before, like, I'm not good at organizing admin, or maybe even just, I'm not organized. But with what I'd learned from logosophy, I reflected on what exactly what thoughts were going through my mind regarding organizing and processing these simple expenses. And I was surprised to realize I didn't have any process there. In this case, my thoughts for dealing with this was simply to put expense receipts into a wallet and then try to work out what they were later, which was not working very well. And it only took a moderate effort and time to come up with new thoughts about how to effectively deal with these expenses, and then a little more effort to actually carry out any related actions. And my work often requires dealing with quite difficult tasks when they arise. So how was I able to leave this simple task in such an unconscious state? How could that happen? And what I discovered was surprising to me. It was that I could be in the habit of not wanting to think. And there is a word in logosophy for this called indolence, and it's something that is quite interesting to learn about. But it's basically as if the act of thinking was uncomfortable or undesirable, as if it was something that you do in work situations and then you turn it off outside of that, which led me to reflect, why do I have this attitude? I mean, is the effort of thinking really something unpleasant? And I realized that when I actually think and use that faculty, that whilst there can be effort involved, it's often an empowering experience that begins to improve my life. And what I sometimes mistook for thinking, and I think this is common, was a collection of thoughts passing through my mind, often with a not great effect, not pleasant effect. And this was a kind of discovery for me. And I wonder, have you ever noticed this difference? Is this something you could discern? The difference between thoughts passing through the mind instead of actually using your faculty of thinking. And so I began paying more attention to this in a broader way. It got me into paying more attention to this simple example. What other areas of my life could I be living on what we could call autopilot mode? For instance, are there times when I seem to be in a worse mood? Or why do I react a certain way to what somebody says? Do I really have coherent thoughts about what they're saying? Or are these just half-heartedly planted seeds, associations or pictures in the imagination? And I began paying attention to various projects and goals that I had. And I realized that many of them were not nearly as clearly defined as I had imagined, which was quite a thing to realize. And it is something worth paying attention to. I mean, you may well not have any specific problem with something like organizing expenses, but are there other areas of life running on autopilot, with those default thoughts getting onto the mental bus whenever they like? What would be the result if more attention was given to observing and changing these areas? And there is one concept in logosophy that probably sums up the importance of this for me the best. And it says simply, surely life changes merely by changing the thoughts that sustain it morally, psychologically, and spiritually. And I'll pass back to Mariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And I would like to share an experience on how I managed to change my thoughts to better deal with a family member. I think it will illustrate how becoming more aware of this series of changing in my way of thinking and feeling can help me deal with small and big problems that I face throughout my day. So like many people, I also have difficulties dealing with some family members, and I felt annoyed, and I had a very hard time dealing with that person. In the presence of that person, I noticed my mind being filled up with a lot of negative thoughts. And all those thoughts made me rude, impatient, intolerant. And it was not easy to admit to my own self, but they did make me also a very hard person to deal with. So to tell you the truth, it was I'm not sure if I would be able to admit it if I wasn't a student of logosophy. I don't know. But well, I just couldn't help having those thoughts anyway. All those negative thoughts were changing my behavior, was turning my life into a nightmare. And I didn't want that. My bad relationship with that person was also affecting my relationship with another beloved family member. And this was killing me. I could see that I was not acting in a way that just wasn't me. The way that I was acting wasn't me, or perhaps who I wanted to be, right? But why? Why I can get along with that person? So in the middle of this struggle, try to have better thoughts, trying to control the thoughts of my mind, and trying to be more in charge of my thoughts, but still seeing my reactions being totally different from the person that I want to be. I read these questions in one of the philosophical books. Let's just, actually, if you can pop it up. Thank you. So until when we will keep on thinking that is for others to change their way? Aren't we bestowing on others a benefits that we deny to ourselves? So with this, I understood that I was waiting on others to change. I wish for others to change their way so I wouldn't have any problems to deal with. Why do I have to wait for others to change to have a better life, to live better moments? So when I did that flip, I start to look inside of me, searching for things that I need to change first. I saw then how much I was limiting myself. There was then that I realized that when I could make those changes in myself, my whole life expanded. Because I was improving who I am. I am becoming more capable of dealing with situations that I didn't know how to deal before. I was learning to be better, to become a better person. So that person doesn't bother me much anymore. And when she eventually does, I try to understand why. Why this bother me? What else is there for me to learn and to perfect myself? And let me tell you, every time that I identify something to work on and to get better at it, can be a small thing or a huge change. It brings me great happiness. A happiness of overcoming my own difficulties, the happiness of improving myself, the happiness in my effort to be better, in my search for solution. I feel the joy of conducting my life to the destiny I want to live, to change what I need to in my inner world to achieve what and who I want to be. And therefore, live the life that I want to live. So how about you, Simon? Do you feel this happiness? You are still in mute. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Sorry, don't know why that happened. Yeah, just like Mariana, I also felt happiness and even a certain amount of power when I became aware of this possibility of beginning to change that internal world and therefore my life in this way. And perhaps I was even a bit too enthusiastic at first, as my imagination kind of ran wild and imagined changing any thoughts in that world that I was not happy with very quickly. And of course, it doesn't happen quite like this. I mean, some thoughts take up what we could call a broader zone of the mind, or it will take time and persistence to identify exactly what these thoughts are doing. And since some even kind of visit and then are gone for a time, they can be hard to catch at first. And perhaps this does sound a little strange at first, being happy about finding something negative in yourself. But I do know for myself and other logosophy students that this is how it feels, because it means I've discovered a useful clue about myself. And it's a clue that I can apply to my life. And it is one of the most interesting things that I've grasped in logosophy, that these seemingly small moments can give clues to the bigger questions in life. For instance, if I'm not the thoughts in my mind when I get distracted by online videos, then who am I? And really, this is one of the core topics of logosophy. And it's always been a goal of any spiritual topic I've looked at in the past. And whilst it's beyond the scope of anything I can briefly say in this talk, I can say for myself that it's by studying the thoughts and their actions that this grand sounding topic has begun to make more sense and be more practical. And hopefully I've given a taste that beginning to answer such questions is not something remote or unrelated to the reality of our lives. And it doesn't have to be something that we accept other people's beliefs about either. In logosophy, it's precisely in the field of our everyday life where we begin to understand and verify answers to some of those big questions that I think everyone ultimately has, even if there's a lot in modern life that can distract us from acknowledging their existence. And it is, who would have thought that tackling an issue like getting distracted by online videos could lead to insights about who I really am. And I will pass back to Mariana for the final word.
Yeah, I hope it brought like interesting things to think about. So what we have talking about here make you feel something different inside of you, it may be because there is a part of you that wants to know a little bit more about all this subject. And if you are interested in learning more about logosophy, the best way to do it is subscribe for free courses where you can start to study and apply it to our own life. I will pass the link on the chat for whoever is interested. And additionally, you can read any logosophical books completely for free in the website. And you can click in this R code there that will lead to the website. Let me copy and paste here the application form for free courses. And you can also find more videos on YouTube with talks where other students of logosophy, just like us, share their experiences in many languages, in Portuguese, in English, in Spanish, and so on. There's plenty. So that's all for tonight. In the name of Logosophy Foundation, I thank you all for participating in this talk, and I wish you all a good night or good evening.
Yeah, good night. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.